wonder if that'll help. Good evening. Welcome to this meeting of the Planning and Development Council of the Town of Oakville. Madam Clerk, we have regrets from Councillor Palmer, who, as everyone knows, is on maternity leave. And Council, are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? Madam Clerk, I see none. Which two of you would like to move us into Committee of the Whole? Councillor Lischina, Councillor Giddings, all in favor? And that's carried. And we are now in the relaxed rule set of the Committee as a Whole, which is our custom for planning affairs in order to have more interchange with the public. The first item on our agenda is the consent item for the electric vehicle charging station funding opportunity. And we have a presentation if required. We have no registered delegations, and so imagining that this would be a consent item, that's why it's slugged that way. Councillor Adams?
I'd be pleased to move the recommendations of our staff.
Thank you. Discussion? Questions? Councillor Giddings, are you asking questions?
I am. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Going through the list in Table 1, I didn't see the new Southeast Community Center as being one of the community centers. Just wondering if that was going to be in the works in the second phase.
Commissioner? Deputy Town Manager?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I understand that Southeast Community Center already has identified
Awesome.
EV stations at that location, so it wouldn't need to be covered by this bylaw.
Perfect, thank you.
You'd like more, though. Councillor Robertson?
In the same tone, QE Park will not have one budgeted and does not have one on this list. So I would like to ask for staff to make sure that each rec center has one. And I realize that there are 40. So at the staff's discretion about where to move that 40 around, could QE Park be please added to the list?
Certainly, through you, Mr. Mayor, we'll look at each of the community centers and the 40 that are there in order to ensure they're accommodated.
Thank you.
That's a great answer. Thank you very much. May I put the vote? All those in favor? Opposed, if any, and the consent item is consented to. Now, this is an item that is the next item is a public hearing, and there's a couple of things I need to say about that. The first is that members of council and the public should try to keep aware that as of September 3rd, most of the changes to the Planning Act that arise from the Bill 108, called the More Homes, More Choice Act of 2019, have been proclaimed into force. This includes expanding the grounds of appeal of a municipal decision or non-decision on an official plan amendment or zoning bylaw amendment, and allowing the local planning appeal tribunal to make any land use planning decision the municipality or approval authority could have made. So somewhat enlarging the ambit of that unelected body, if an editorial comment is allowed. And the other thing I need to say is, because this is a public hearing, if a person or public body does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or make written submissions to council on a proposed official plan amendment, zoning bylaw amendment, and or plan of subdivision or condominium before the decision is made, that person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision of Oakville Council to the local planning appeal tribunal and may not be added as a party to the hearing of an appeal before the LPAT. And that, I think, concludes the announcements. So this matter is the proposed temporary use bylaw that was requested by council a couple of meetings ago in regards to Acclaim Health and Community Care Services, which is proposing to build a respite center, as I'll describe it, at 2250 Spears Road. We have a presentation from Charles McConnell, the manager of current planning, and we have registered delegations from 4 people, and I will poll the audience if there are others who wish to add their information. Mr. McConnell, you get to lead off.
Thank you, Mayor Burton and members of council. A zoning amendment application has been submitted with respect to the property at 2250 Spears Road by Acclaim Health and Community Services. The staff report can be found on page 15 of tonight's addendum report. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to report back as directed from the August 6, 2019 Planning and Development Council meeting. By way of background, this air photo identifies the site and its context within the surrounding area. The subject lands are located on the south side of Spears Road, east of Bronte Road, and west of Third Line. The site is currently occupied by a single-story industrial building and parking area. Surrounding land uses include low-density residential detached dwellings to the south and office and industrial uses to the east, west, and north. The proposed zoning bylaw amendment application would allow for the conversion of an existing building into a dementia care facility providing services including family caregiver support, an adult day program, and short-stay overnight respite care. The ancillary temporary respite care area includes 8 beds for clients for use for up to 2 weeks consecutively. Clients using the overnight respite beds will take part in the adult day program, providing for 24-hour care during their stay. The application has not changed since its original submission. The subject lands are zoned E1, office employment, in zoning bylaw number 2014-014. A wide range of uses are permitted in the office and employment zone. This slide shows the subject lands in relation to the residential uses to the south and the E3 zoned lands to the north. There are 3 fundamental aspects of the zoning amendment application being sought by Acclaim Health, those being to increase the percentage of floor space for day cares from 20 to 80%, to allow temporary overnight respite care, and to seek relief from footnote number 17 of the E3 employment zone, which states daycare uses shall not be permitted within 120 meters of an industrial E3 zone. The subject lands are designated as office employment by the Livable Oakville Plan. The dementia care facility is considered a community use, which is a permitted use in every land use designation except in the natural heritage system. The subject lands are identified on the town's urban structure as being within the employment mixed use corridor along Spears Road, which is also identified as a regional transit priority corridor. A range of uses are permitted within the office employment designation, including offices, hotels, public halls, light industrial uses, and training facilities, and commercial schools. There have been 2 recent amendments to the Livable Oakville Plan affecting these lands. The first is OPA 26. This amendment updated the maps and text in response to the town-wide employment and commercial review. With respect to these lands, OPA 26 had the effect of redesignating these lands to business employment so as to serve as a transition to the abutting residential areas. OPA 26 is still under review by Halton Region. With respect to the second amendment, being Official Plan Amendment number 27, this amendment updated policies and maps to implement the findings of the Spears Road Corridor Study. It identified Spears Road as an intensification corridor and further identified the lands as falling within the Bronte Go Major Transit Station Area, or the MTSA. This ongoing study is to provide updated and new policies to delineate the boundary, the mix of land uses such as employment, commercial, and residential, and the intensity and scale of future residential development within this area. The MTSA study is expected to be completed in 2020, and OPA 27, likewise, is still under review by Halton Region. So at the August 6th Planning and Development Council meeting, a recommendation report had been presented to Council, which had recommended denial of the application based on the lack of sufficient information and analysis to demonstrate conformance with the Ministry of Environment D6 guidelines and related provincial, regional, and local planning policy. However, Council adopted the motion as illustrated on the slide in front of you. The concentric circles on this slide illustrate the potential influence areas as measured from 2250 Spears Road, being areas within which adverse impacts and effects might be experienced for industrial land uses. The solid blue line represents the northerly boundary of residential property situated to the south of Spears Road. The hatched area represents those additional industrial lands that would now fall within the expanded potential influence area should a claim health be approved. So just to illustrate, this is the blue line along the cursor is the boundary between the residential areas to the south and the employment lands that front on to both the south and the north side of Spears Road. So under the D6 guidelines, there's what's known as a potential influence area based on the classification of the employment use. The Class 1 industrial use, which would be the least impactful type of employment use, has the smallest radius at 70 meters. So that's what this first concentric circle represents. And then the solid line represents the area of influence if a claim health, being the area in dark, would be approved on these subject lands. So these are the additional lands that would be impacted from a Class 1 perspective. Similarly, for the Class 2 or the medium level of industrial operations, the sphere of influence is somewhat greater at 300 meters. And likewise, it shows the 300-meter separation from the blue line, and so it's a straight line, being the residential boundary. Likewise, it's a straight line from the 300 meters. But now with the inclusion of the property of a claim health being introduced, that sphere of influence is now expanded within this hatched area. And then thirdly, with respect to the Class 3 sphere of influence for the heaviest types of industrial operations, that range is that much greater, and it is 1 kilometer or 1,000 meters. So similarly, there is now an area of impact in the hatched area across the top. So in total, there are 4 properties that are classified as Class 1, or the light industrial businesses. There are 4 properties that are of a Class 2, or the medium industrial operation, and there are 6 properties that are of the Class 3, or the heavy industrial types of operations. And I'll just give you an example of the types of Class 1, 2, and 3. So for example, a Class 1 industry would be, say, a roofing contractor or an indoor training type of facility. A Class 2 industry is something of a bit more intense in nature, and that could be, say, a kitchen cabinet refinishing business. And then a Class 3 industry would be, for example, a tanker and rail car repair facility. So obviously a far more intensive type of operation. So even though existing industries of all classes may fall within the corresponding potential influence area as measured from the existing residential areas as shown in blue, and that's an impact that would flow southerly down to those residential uses. Additionally, this application by a claim health must evaluate the impact that a sensitive land use, being a claim health, would have on the existing and planned for industrial uses. And then that is an impact that would flow northerly. And that's the critical difference and importance in the consideration of this application, is that these areas in hatched would now be impacted from an existing and a planned function. They have particular zoning rights under the zoning bylaw, and that could be impacted by virtue of the extension of a sensitive land use northerly of the existing residential boundary. So both the town and region would require additional information from the proponent to better understand the full impact of 1, the existing and planned for industrial uses in the potential influence area, including the hatched area on a sensitive land use, and their ability to renew and obtain a certificate of approval from the Ministry of the Environment if a sensitive land use were to be introduced into the potential influence area. And again, to reiterate, Town Council did direct staff to bring forward a report to consider a temporary use bylaw to consider the proposed dementia care facility. So the following resolution is being put forward for Council's consideration this evening.
Thank you very much, Mr. McConnell. Does anyone have questions of staff? This is the time. Mr. McConnell, thank you for your report. Councillor Adams, belatedly.
Sorry, was there any effort at reaching out to the landowners in those hatched areas?
They were included in the, no, to answer your question, no, not at this point. I believe through the review of the air and the noise quality studies, their properties, the type of business operation was assessed. So it's not so much a matter of reaching out to them, it's that existing business operation which is the critical factor in determining what the impact would be from a D6 perspective and the conformance with the provincial policy.
But they weren't necessarily notified of the decision that was coming forward?
They were outside of the
Notification area.
notification area.
So despite being outside of the notification area, they fall within these particular circles, but they weren't notified?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Mr. McConnell, thank you very much. Madam Clerk, would you call the registered delegations?
Our first delegation speaking to this item is Chad Murray.
Mr. Murray, welcome. Council looks forward to your information.
Thank you, Your Worship. On behalf of, in anticipation of this being approved tonight, on behalf of the thousands of people who will be impacted by this over the years to come, those with dementia, those with caregivers, those who have needs for this service, and the need is critical everywhere, and particularly in Halton, as there is no respite care. The hundreds of volunteers that work with the Claim Health, the management, the board, I wish to thank you very much for taking a giant leap forward to help all of our clients. Mayor Burton, we'd like to recognize some people who have been a great help to our team and bringing us to this moment. Mayor Burton and your members of council, we have really thank you very much. Councillor Shano Mera, who has been helping us behind the scenes, navigating the intricacies of municipal government, which is foreign to most of us, and we've come to respect your role in running this beautiful town of ours. That the town Oakville planning staff, including Mark Simonoli and Charlie McConnell, who've been extremely patient with us as we worked our way through this process. We're trying to do something new, and they've helped us find a way forward. Members of council, you will be our knights in shining armor. You took a courageous stand to get this badly needed project on track for completion by the end of 2020. We must close our facility at Sheridan College at the end of this year, December of 2020, so we must be completed by then. And by taking this action, you prove that local government works best. Remote government isn't always the answer. We look forward to seeing you all at the opening of the state-of-the-art adult day program and respite care facility. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. Murray. Madam Clerk, the next delegation.
The next delegation is Laura Clark and Nigel Taylor.
Welcome. Council looks forward to your information. I was going to say duet, but.
Thank you, councillors and your worship. My name's Nigel Taylor. I'm an air quality specialist with a company called Novus Environmental that has just recently been acquired by SLR Canada, Consulting Canada. This is my colleague, Laura Clark. Laura's also an air quality specialist with the same firm, and we were retained by Claim Health to look at matters of air quality that might be impacting the site, the development site itself, and also impacting potentially the industries around. So what I'd like to do is just enter in some illustrations. I don't, if I give them to you, give them copies. What these are is it gives an explanation of basically the illustration that was just provided before that had the concentric circles on it, and just to give a little bit more understanding and how this all works as far as we need an overhead?
So right beside you there, there's a pad,
Oh, great.
and whatever you put
Oh,
on it,
excellent. I've never done this
an
before. I'm
overhead
sorry.
camera will magically
Isn't
capture,
that neat?
and eventually it will appear on the screens for
Okay.
everyone.
So I think to start out with is that it needs to be understand the D6 guidelines, and I know that they're in the Halton land use compatibility guidelines as well. That's the basis of them. And it needs to be understood that from a perspective of planning, including at the Ontario Municipal Board and now what is now the LPAT, or Local Planning, Local Planning Appeals Tribunal, in both cases, they are considered as guidelines only. They are something that provides an idea of whether or not a more fulsome or detailed study needs to be done in the different circles. What it has is potential areas of influence that might be an issue as far as industrial emissions go. What this first illustration points out is that there's only a few sites existing right now that are class 3, and what we found in our studies is they are not impacting on the proposed development, nor is the proposed development causing any issues from them from a current compliance perspective. I think one other very important aspect of this is that we look at this, when we're looking at this red box that shows the new facility, or the revamped facility that will now become the respite care site, the actual point of reception is right by the border of the of what is now the residential areas. So where the actual beds will be in the south end, and there's only 8 of them. And the mitigation that's been put forth for the site has the intakes to be on the south side of the building, right down here. So effectively, by adding, if we looked at it and we said that we were adding another receptor, and we made the assumption that it was similar to a residential receptor, it's right on the border of those. So in my opinion, and in the air quality study that we completed, there shouldn't be an issue as far as causing anything from the existing industries and how they're operating, from any expansions of those industries or any new industries coming in, because there will already be the issue that they're going to have to look at the residential sites as well. And if I put forth another one, and I think the best one, I'm just going to go to the last one just to save time, but there's other slides in there. There we go. So what we see there is, again, the site at the bottom. And what is shown is that there are other places of sensitivity that are located throughout this study area. And it includes this number 5, which is the actual daycare facility, which has a playground in the background of it, because most daycares have playgrounds. So there's a playground in the back, and not on this actual figure, but pretty close into this area as well. There's actually a medical clinic there that does endoscopy, does pain management, and other items. There's actually, I know it's still a little bit farther out, but it's still in the same kind of area as far as the industry goes. There's actually a hotel that's right here with operable windows. That is, to mention, 6 stories. The one to the north of it, the Holiday Inn, I believe it is, it's, this one is for the suites. The one, the Holiday Inn, is a little higher, but it doesn't have operable windows. The reason I'm mentioning this is it's really important for industries that are going to be active going forward, and especially if there's new ones coming in. One of the things that you don't want to restrict them from is having the ability to mitigate through having stack height or whatever to make dispersion of any emissions that might be coming less of an issue. And the thing is that the site that's going to be put in here, the Acclaim Health facility, is only 1 story. There's no high-rise component to it that would cause any issue for having industries in the future to have a problem with trying to figure out how they're going to mitigate any emissions that they might have. All industries, whether they're active now, active later, or new ones coming in, there's no grandfather clause. They must and have to abide by Regulation 41905, which is the quality regulation in Ontario. They have to meet all contaminants that are health-based, including particulate. Dust came up as an issue in some of the reports that were there. They have to meet that at the industrial property line. So if there was a class 3 that came up here, they have to meet all of those contaminants at their property line, with the exception of odor, which is receptor-based. The mitigation that's been put into this site is there's no operable windows, they're sealed, there's carbon filtration on the intakes, and the intakes are going to be situated at the south end or southeast if you look at it on a north perspective, but it will be on the south portion of the property. I think I don't have anything else to say. I would submit that the studies that have been done, and then also through the comments of the region, that there's been additional information that's been put through, including actual site measurements that were taken for potential odors. In my opinion, and in my colleague's opinion, we don't see any reason why this should not be put forward as a great place for people to be able to take their loved ones when they need to be looked after. If there's any questions, I welcome them.
Thank you for your information. Councillor O'Meara has a question for you.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you very much, Mr. Taylor, for that technical waltz you danced us through there. If you can just help me so that I can understand what you just said in about 7 minutes. So the existence currently of a daycare and of other sensitive land use areas that are already in that black circle mean that whatever the new hatched areas are, they would have to conform and they would have to go through the same D6 certification process regardless of whether this new facility is built. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Perfect. Thank you, Your Worship.
Anyone else? Thank you very much for coming and sharing your information. Madam Clerk?
Our last listed delegation for this item is Emma West, Planning Consultant.
Welcome, Ms. West. Council looks forward to your information.
Good evening. Thank you very much, Your Worship and members of Council. I'm Emma West. I'm a partner at Bousfields. I'm a planning consultant working with Acclaim Health. I'm going to use the same figure just very briefly, the last page that you have before you. I'll keep my comments brief. We know that the main outstanding concern expressed by the town and the region relates to the viability of the existing employment uses and future employment uses within the employment lands. As you heard Mr. Taylor explain, that although the hatched areas on this drawing in the red that were identified as areas that were outside of the area of influence from the residential properties to the south. You've heard that there are other sensitive uses within the overall employment area that overlap with those hatched areas and therefore would need to be taken into account when any industry, new or existing, would be applying for a compliance certificate to operate in the area. And therefore, this proposal does not add to that. Those industries would already have to go through that process. I'd also like to clarify that reference has been made to some of the provincial policies, and I know that there's been a lot of effort to understand how those would apply to the site. And just to point out that the provincial policy, which I think is of most interest to everyone, is Provincial Policy Statement Policy 1.2.6.1. And in that policy, it does provide options for how you address matters such as this. It doesn't say it can't happen at all. It says that you need to ensure that Major facilities and sensitive land use have been appropriately designed, buffered, and/or separated from each other to prevent or mitigate adverse effects from odor, dust, et cetera. So there have been mitigation measures proposed in terms of inoperable windows, the location of the overnight beds, and therefore the design responds to that balance between the sensitive use and the major facilities. So that provincial policy, as I said, does not direct that they have to be entirely separated. There are options in terms of how you review and address that. I think that's an important consideration. As you've heard, the proposed use is a community use. It is not a residential use. It is not a medical facility where people will be receiving treatments. It's essentially an adult daycare with the 8 overnight beds, which would function like a hotel as a temporary overnight stay. And hotels are permitted within the zoning now. As are daycares, you've heard we are asking for some modifications with respect to the daycare use for adults. So in my opinion, the proposal is consistent with provincial policies, specifically the provincial policy statement. It conforms with the growth plan. It conforms with the region's policies and the town's policies. It's an appropriate and desirable use, and I think it represents good planning, and I would request that you approve the application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there questions for the lady? Thank you, ma'am. All right, I'm going to poll the audience for additional input if anybody wishes to offer it before I recognize Councillor O'Meara, who plans to move the temporary use bylaw. Is there anyone else here to speak for or against this? One more time. Councillor O'Meara, you have the floor.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm happy to put forward this motion, and I'll read it out as according here. That planning staff report dated September 4th, 2019 regarding zoning bylaw amendment application Z.1628.01 submitted by Acclaim Health and Community Care Services for 2250 Spears Road be received. Second, that the application be approved as amended in accordance with the temporary use bylaw 2019-085 attached as appendix X to the staff report. And item 3, that bylaw 2019-085 be passed. I would ask for my colleagues' support in this. It's a great endeavor. I think they've gone above and beyond to show that it fits and that there are other uses of similar nature in the area already. And this does give us some time to review it in 3 years' time as per the temporary use bylaw. So with that, thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor O'Meara. I plan to support your motion, and I'm especially interested in thanking Acclaim and Novus and Bosfield for clearing up any doubt we might have had about how all of this fits together with the D guidelines. And on that last graph, I don't know if you could see it, but there's a purple line way up at the top of the employment area that is generated from the residential area that exists just below the Acclaim site. So the overlapping influences are an important consideration for me in being able to support this. With that, I'll call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That carries. Thank you, everybody. Now, I would invite you to stay and enjoy the rest of the meeting with us. Something tells me you might have a party to go to or something. So we'll just sit quietly for a couple of minutes while you exit so that you're not disturbing the rest of the meeting. Because last time I used this for a recess, I had trouble getting all of the folks back. A minor little detail. Our next item will be the public meeting and recommendation report on the draft plan of condominium at 2165 Buckingham Road. And we have a presentation from Kelly Livingstone, our planner, and no registered delegations known to me. Councillor Adams.
Your Worship, I don't believe that I need to see the presentation. I've read the report and I'm confident in moving the recommendation if there's no other questions.
Council,
Or any delegations.
Councillor Adams is prepared to move the item without the presentation. The report is, of course, way more detailed than the presentation. How do you feel? Do you want the presentation? May I put the vote? All those in favor? Opposed, if any, and that is carried. Thank you, everybody. The next item is the public meeting and recommendation report for the draft plan of condominium for Ballantree. And we have a presentation on deck from Tricia Collingwood. Councillor Knoll?
Your Worship, I'd like to make the similar recommendation that Councillor Adams has made with respect to this matter.
And you're moving the item?
I'd be happy to move the item.
Council, may I put the vote? All those in favor? Opposed, if any, and that's carried. The next is the discussion item, and this is the recommendation report on 320 Bronte Road, Inc. And it's a proposed official plan and zoning amendment and draft plan of subdivision and draft plan of common element condominium at 320, 350 Bronte Road. And the report from the planning department recommends refusal of the application. We have a registered delegation from Ms. Sally Burgess, and we also have a presentation from our manager of current planning if anybody needs a brief summary of why planning staff are recommending refusal. Mr. McConnell, it looks like you're up. Oh, we're up to 3. All right. And I'll poll the audience if there's more.
Thank you, Mayor Burton and members of council. The report can be found on page 97 of tonight's addendum agenda. And the purpose of tonight's meeting is to present a recommendation on this development application. So these air photos identify the site and its context within the surrounding area. The subject property is located on the west side of Bronte Road, north of Rebecca Street. The entire property includes lands below the top of bank and is approximately 1.9 hectares in size. Currently, 3 detached dwellings, a church, and a daycare exist on the subject lands. Applications for an official plan amendment, zoning bylaw amendment, draft plan of subdivision, and a draft plan of condominium have been submitted by 320 Bronte Road, Inc., proposing a development comprising of 28 block townhouses, 1 new single detached dwelling, and the change in use of the existing daycare building to a residential use. This slide illustrates the proposed development as earlier described. The land's back onto Bronte Creek, which is identified as a major valley system. The natural area designation limit will follow the most restrictive limit, being the 10-meter drip line setback. A number of features of the proposed development have been included within that limit, including a portion of the 762 square meter dwelling and its associated rear yard amenity area, a portion of the side and rear yards for Block E, which are the centrally located townhouse block, a garbage truck turnaround area, the visitors' parking spaces, a portion of the front yard for Block B, Unit 12, the existing daycare, its access and playground area, and the proposed addition onto the daycare building being proposed for conversion to a detached dwelling. The site is designated and is within the stable residential community as defined by the Livable Oakville Plan and is designated as low-density residential and parkway belt. In addition, Schedule B, Natural Features and Hazard Lands, identifies a portion of the rear of the properties as having the following: the valley lands, Area of Natural and Scientific Interest, or ANSI, ESA, or Environmentally Sensitive Area, and woodlands. The submitted application proposes to redesignate a portion of the subject property from low-density residential to medium-density residential, so as to permit a single detached dwelling within a residential medium density designation at a density of 26 units per site hectare. And also to redesignate a portion of the subject property from low density residential to natural area, and to include land use permissions for a single detached dwelling within an existing structure that is located within the natural area designation. From the town zoning bylaw perspective, the site is zoned residential low, RL2-0, community use, CU, and Parkway Belt public use, PB1. The applicant zoning bylaw amendment proposes to rezone portions of the site zoned residential low 2 to a residential medium 1 and a natural area N zoning category, and to rezone portions of the site zoned CU, or the community use, to a residential medium, RM1, and a residential low, RL2-0, and to permit a maximum building height of 13.5 meters. So through the review and the circulation of the application, a number of issues have arisen from the originally submitted application, and that includes inconsistency with the provincial policy statement, nonconformity with the growth plan, nonconformity with the regional Halton OP, and inconsistency with the livable Oakville plan from the perspective of incompatible and surrounding neighborhood and transition characteristics, and the protection of the natural heritage system. An alternate concept was provided to town planning staff on July 24th in consideration of the feedback provided by the public and council at the statutory public meeting held on May 13th of this year. The concept does not have a formal status because it was provided for discussion purposes only and to solicit initial feedback from town departments and public agencies. There are still several unresolved matters as identified by Halton Region, Conservation Halton, and town staff. The applicant did not file the concept formally, which would otherwise allow staff to continue to investigate if there were a viable solution. Staff are still working towards the Bill 139 reporting time frames, which meant a staff report had to be filed in time to meet this evening's agenda. While this was occurring, staff learned of the date of Bill 108 proclamation, which, as your worship had noted, was September 3rd. The alternative concept may have some merit. However, there remain several unanswered questions and concerns. As such, staff must report on the proposal as submitted, and staff do not recommend its approval. In conclusion, your worship, staff put forth the following recommendation as shown for council's consideration.
Thank you very much, Mr. McConnell. Are there questions for Mr. McConnell? Shall I call the, let's have the delegations. Madam Clerk, would you call the delegations?
First delegation is Sally Burgess.
Welcome, Ms. Burgess.
Thank you.
Council is interested to know what you have to add.
Thank you very much. So I really appreciate the opportunity to speak tonight. My husband and I moved to Oakville about 13 years ago, and we came from Western Canada, where we were used to kind of wide open spaces. We chose this particular neighborhood in Oakville because when we started to look around, it was the place that had the feel and the characteristic that we were looking for. They were large lots. You had neighbors, but you're not sitting on top of your neighbors. There were mature trees. There were single-story and double-story homes in the neighborhood. And it just felt like a place that we wanted to be. But these same characteristics make these lots desirable to developers as well. And already we can see that in areas adjacent to where this development is proposed, that other lots have gone up for sale, are sold already, some of them, all hoping for that increased density to come through, and all with an eye to further development. And I feel, as somebody who lives in the neighborhood, that if this is to go ahead, it's going to rapidly change the feeling for the neighborhood that I love and that I like to live in. And I'm just looking down because I did make a couple of notes. There are other areas in Oakville where I feel that this development would be a better fit, areas that have already been designated as growth areas. But And I fully agree with the recommendations that were in the report that came out on Friday that we had a chance to look at over the weekend. I am not adverse to development on this property. I realize that's coming, and I have no problem with development there. I would just like to ask that we consider that the increase in density is going to change things away from what the community is at the moment and away from the livable Oakville plan. And I would really like to ask that you consider that when making your decisions this evening. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Madam Clerk, the next delegation.
The next delegation is Bob Farkas.
Mr. Farkas, welcome.
Thank you.
Council looks forward to your information.
Your Worship. Council, I just saw tonight the recommendation from the Planning Department, and I have to agree with it because I live at 315 Bronte Road, which is right across from this development. And if it goes through the way it's planned, traffic will be unbearable in that area. I mean, come rush hour in the morning and the evening, it's crazy as it is. If you add more houses, basically for every house you have 2 more vehicles. That Bronte and Rebecca corner is going to be a big traffic jam, and nobody's going to be moving anywhere. So, thank you for the opportunity to let me talk.
Well, thank you for coming out and sharing your thoughts.
Thank you.
Madam Clerk, the next delegation.
The last listed delegation is Sheena Barnes.
Ms. Barnes, welcome. Oh, Ms. Barnes, welcome. Council looks forward to your
Thank
information.
you, Your Worship and members of council. I live at Bronte and Rebecca at the corner in 313 Bronte Road. And the noise levels are already very high from traffic at that corner. And I've seen quite a number of car accidents already at that corner myself, and a lot of aggressive driving. So I think if you add a difficult intersection right near that corner, it's going to up the difficulty of getting in and out of that corner, and maybe some of the aggressive driving will escalate. There's significant congestion in the area of the proposed development during rush hour, and I'm hoping that they can consider a lower density housing as it's already zoned for. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for taking the time to come. Council, or is there anyone else in the public with information for council on this? Mr. Cheeseman, welcome to the podium and welcome to council. I was wondering who you might be representing tonight.
Good evening, Your Worship and members of council. My name is Russ Cheeseman. I'm the solicitor for 320 Bronte Road, Inc., the applicants in this matter. I'd just like to point out to members of council that we received the staff report of the town on Friday, September the 6th. The date on that report you'll see that's in front of you is August the 19th, 2019. We don't understand why, if the report was ready on August the 19th, we didn't get to see it till last Friday. There's information contained in that report that follows after the date of the report. There's a letter in there from one of the residents in the area that was added. It comes sometime after August the 19th, so I just want to point that out to you. I want to point out to you, too, that this application was submitted back on March 8th, 2019. It was deemed complete on March the 19th, and a formal public meeting was held on May 13th, 2019. That's the normal process. Now, our client, through its land use planning consultants, Glenn Schnarr and Associates, Inc., have made formal requests for comments as the process has gone on. We did that back on May the 8th, May the 16th, June the 11th, 2019. And there was a meeting that was held on June the 19th in 2019 to discuss the results of that circulation process, what had come in, and the normal process. As a result of that meeting, in June the 19th, a revised submission was made on July 24th. So there's a revision to the application, say here's the revision. We think these address some of the, if not all the issues, some of the issues that we've brought forward. And in terms of that, there were comments on that revised submission that were received from the town staff as late as September the 5th. That's last Thursday, on that revised concept. And that's the date before we got the report. Now, even though, if you look at your agenda and the report, Conservation, Halton, and the region have provided comments to the town as of August the 8th and August the 14th. They provide previous ones as well, but on the latest concept last month, we weren't provided those. We didn't get provided those, so we provided all of them at the end. Now, in terms of what staff is recommending to you this evening, they're saying to you that the application should be refused. Why? I state, I think, sir, reading between the lines, that it's because of the imposed deadline of 210 days that I understand this council has adopted. I just want to point out that your worship was right that the new revisions to the Planning Act have kicked all the dates back, so now it's longer another 210 days, it's now 180 days. But that is an appeal period time. That's when an applicant is put in a position to appeal if an application takes that long. This is an application for an official plan amendment, zoning bylaw amendment, plan of subdivision, and a plan of condominium. My client has not asked for any appeal. And we knew as late as Bill 189? Bill 108, that was brought forward. We knew that the dates were changing and they were going back. And I knew that we were already in a position to appeal. We chose not to do that. I guess if we'd really wanted to, we could have received the report on the 6th and panicked and said, we're going to appeal it. I haven't got those instructions. The reason we haven't got those instructions is because we would like the process to continue in the normal course and have a back and forth. We want to work with the town, the region, and Conservation Halton to respond to comments, to perhaps alter the proposal through that push and pull process that's the normal part of the planning process. I've been doing this for over 30 years. I don't think I've ever seen an application for an OP, a zoning bylaw, and a plan of subdivision that is applied for, and at the end of the day, whether it's approved by a council or the OMB or the LPAT, that looks identical to what was submitted. Just doesn't happen because things have to be processed and looked at and changed and altered. We note that the region and conservation, in their comments back, want revisions to the documentations, and conservation and Halton is saying, well, we'd like a deferral of the whole thing. We want to see it through and have the material submitted to us, and we're happy to do that. We're not here this evening seeking a decision from council on this matter. I just want to put that on the record. We're here in response to the fact that the staff report is being brought forward this evening. We don't have any control about that. That's your process. You brought it forward. We'd like to ask you to refer this matter back to staff for continued processing of all of the applications, and that's all of them, the 4 that are there, that form part of the proposal for these lands. There is no need, I would submit to you, to refuse this application this evening, because all that does, if you do so, is throw us into the appeal process of the Planning Act. That's what my clients would have to do in order to keep the matter moving forward. And if we do that, my clients would much rather not to get into that adversarial position at this point in time. We'd like to work with staff of the town, the region, and Conservation Home to work towards a solution if there is one to happen, and we'd like it to be a made in Oakville decision. Because if we appeal it to the LPAT and it's out there, then as you know, everything after that point doesn't take place in a public forum, and nobody really knows what's going on until it's all over. So those are my submissions to you. I'd like you to refer this matter back to staff.
Thank you very much for your submissions, Mr. Cheeseman.
Thank you.
Does staff have any additional information for council?
Mayor, we have no further information unless you have any questions of us in terms of next steps.
Well, let me just check an assumption of mine. It's my perception that the changes that have been brought to the planning regime in Ontario have not only reduced the timelines, but also reduced our ability to engage in the kind of latitude that Mr. Cheeseman invites us to participate in. Are we better off to invite them to start over?
To you, Mr. Mayor. Under the Bill 139 requirements, it was always, with the changes they made to the LPAT process, it would have been advantageous for council to have made a decision, because then that decision sets the record for where council is. Under Bill 108, the LPAT starts again and looks at the matter. It's a de novo hearing. And with this report, in front of council, you would have had staff's considerations that would help form part of council's position if you ever went to a hearing. So actually, in just consulting with Doug Carr, would be nothing that would prejudice, I think, council's position later on at an LPAT hearing if you were to defer this matter back to staff. If you refuse the application, I would agree with Mr. Cheeseman, as what he said is that it automatically, their next step is only an appeal process. So it kicks it into an appeal and the LPAT making the decision. So if the applicant is willing to make some kind of an indication that they're not going to appeal that application, we have no guarantee of that. In order to give some time period for discussions, if they're willing to revise that application, it may be in a process that allows us to deal with it here at the town rather than to have it go into the LPAT process.
So it sounds like you have a recommendation for us, which is to defer in order to explore this make the decision in Oakville option.
Yes, but I would preclude that by saying it would be nice to hear from the applicant on whether or not they're prepared not to appeal the application, and that they are willing to consider the issues that the staff report has raised in order to work collectively towards another solution.
Seems fair to me. Mr. Cheeseman, can you speak for your client?
I will try. I've already put on the record so that we were not in a position this evening to appeal. We don't want to appeal. If you look at the comments that are contained in the staff report from the region and the conservation home, there's work that has to be done. The EIS has to be revised. There's a lot of technical work that has to, we want to conclude all of that. We want to bring all of that forward. So if you're looking from a position of my client, we're not, well, I can tell you, we're not looking to appeal this thing. If we were, we would have done it already if we were concerned with the time frame. We just want to make sure that the process continues. We want to go back to staff. We want to submit whatever it is they're looking for and see if there's a resolution in a push-pull way to see if there's a solution that can accommodate everybody.
So the final point that the staff have raised for you is, will you commit to work to satisfy the staff concerns?
Absolutely, sir. That's what we're engaging in this process from the beginning to do. We submit an application, we get it back, we give back our response, we get a pushback. That's what this is about, give and take. And when they point out to us that, oh, there's a problem with the technicality, go get your consultant to look at X, we got to go do that. And that's what we're prepared to do.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. But there's still no guarantee after the negotiations back and forth that they still could consider going to LAPAT. Is that correct?
That's right. There's no difference that way. But what the commissioner and the solicitor were suggesting is that the staff report gives us a flag in the ground on what our position is. And I think maybe you might want to move a motion to go into camera to get advice subject to solicitor-client privilege on this matter, I suspect. If I'm wrong, then don't do it. Councillor O'Meara.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm Councillor Robertson and myself met with the applicant and over 100 residents in December of 2018. And all of the issues that our staff have spoken to are for reasons of refusing were all issues that these residents raised at that public meeting. And the application came in with no changes from what the residents told them we needed to see. And this was done long ahead, and still, the application before us still addresses the concerns that were raised almost a year ago. So I have a hard time understanding why the reasons and we heard so eloquently expressed tonight from the residents, the same issues they brought up almost a year ago. So I'm not sure what where we're going to go, where all of a sudden now we're going to push and pull. There was a request from the community to address these issues before the application was submitted, and here we are at a recommendation meeting now being told, oh, well, we'll work on it. We've already been down that road. The residents already made their voices known, so I'm not sure what a referral back to staff is going to do that the applicant hasn't had almost a year to work on. They've known the issues since we met last December. So I would not be supporting a referral back to staff at this point.
Thank you, Councillor O'Meara. Anyone else? Councillor Elger.
I'd like to move, we move into closed session to get solicitor client information regarding this issue.
Thank you. The relevant section starts out that way and concludes about litigation or the possibility of litigation, and I think that's a sufficient cause for to put the vote. May I put the vote? All those in favor? And any against? We're going to change the chamber over for a meeting closed to the public briefly, and we will call you back when we're done. All right, welcome back. I'm calling the meeting back to the public session back to order. Council has met in a session closed to the public for the permitted purpose of receiving advice of solicitor-client privilege considering litigation or potential litigation, including matters before administrative tribunals affecting the municipality or local board. And other one, advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose as permitted by the statute and the code of, and the procedural bylaw of the town of Oakville. Mr. Cheeseman, council has heard your request, and I believe that we may be about to give you the deferral you requested until October 3rd or sooner, at which point we will call a special meeting of the P&D Council because the next P&D is after what we calculate to be the expiry date, which we calculate to be the 4th of October. Is that satisfactory? Is that what you had in mind?
I don't understand what.
Okay, we're going to defer, we're thinking about deferring the report
To October.
to the day before what we calculate the deadline to be, the appeal deadline, which is, we believe your appeal rights crystallize on the 4th of October. Let's just say that your legal opinion about when that happens and our legal opinion are different.
Oh, okay.
So we're going to go with ours.
Right. Oh, so you're saying the appeal period as provided by the term in the Planning Act?
Yes.
I'm okay with that, sir.
So the condition on which we're doing this is that we can take you at your word that you're going to work to satisfy the conditions, the concerns of the municipalities and the conservation, which is what we heard you to be saying. Thank you. All right, Councillor Duddick?
I will move the deferral until the date so indicated.
Okay, so this is a motion to defer until a special meeting of Planning and Development Council on or before October 3rd. Councillor O'Meara.
Thank you. Just in speaking to the deferral, with the gravest respect to the applicant and our staff, I don't know how you push and pull in 3 weeks on a character of a neighborhood. And that's what we've been hearing from these residents. And, you know, again, I will be voting against the deferral on this. I think we've had long enough. This is out of character, as was specifically stated in our report, and I won't be supporting a deferral. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Meara. Anyone else? Councillor Robertson?
I stand with Councillor O'Meara on the same point. I also feel that what was proposed in July didn't and won't significantly change, so I don't know how in 3 weeks you will create that much of a significant change, because this was the first we got to see anything from the July 24th proposal. And even in that brief one slide, I found that the July 24th actually increased in density, may have taken care of some of Top of Bank, but issues, and may have taken care of some of the parking issues, but doesn't take care of the whole townhouse character of the neighborhood area.
Thank you, Councillor. Anyone else? Councillor Duddick.
Thank you. I can fully appreciate my colleagues' frustration and those of the residents involved with this. This has been a very long and arduous process for them. I think given that we're looking at just a month, basically, in which to render a decision, and the fact that we've got an applicant albeit at the 11th hour, who's come forward and said they're willing to revisit some of the concerns we've expressed from the onset. I think this speaks to the bigger issue that we've always had with the Bill 108 and other bills introduced by the current government, where this speaks to the fact this is the way it's worked well for us in the past, is to have this opportunity to have a back and forth and to have it play out in a sufficient time frame that it's complete. Unfortunately, we're now dealing with the government that has our heads in the neck, so to speak.
Okay, thank you. May I put the vote? All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you, that carries. It was close. The next item is the item number 6, the Cultural Heritage Landscape Strategy Phase 2 for St. Jude's Cemetery. And Carolyn Van Slichtenhorst, our heritage planner, is here if required, and we have no registered delegations. Councillor Duddick.
Your Worship, unless there's questions from any of my colleagues, I'd be willing to move this and to also acknowledge and thank Heritage staff for such an excellent report. I mean, even our Heritage Committee commented at length about the fact it was extremely thorough, very, very informative, and we thank you very much for all your work in regards to this. So
Here, here.
pleased to
May I
move
put the
it.
vote? All in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. The next is the Notice of Intention to Designate Aircliffs Estate Cultural Heritage Landscape. Councillor Giddings.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Further to Councillor Duddick's comments, if anyone needs to hear the report or have questions about it, certainly, but it is another excellent report. The members of the Heritage Committee heard this at the same time as the previous item, and they wholly endorsed it with great excitement. And it's an incredible property, and I'd just like to give thanks to the late Mayor Barrett for his foresight that allowed us to be at this position this evening.
Here, here.
I got this tie from the late Mayor Barrett in his honor tonight. It's moved by Councillor Giddings. May I put the vote? All in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Thank you, everybody. Your next item is the Parking Management Report from Planning Services, and you have no registered delegations. Are you satisfied with the report? Mr. Barrett is available if you have questions or want a synopsis. Councillor Sanju, ask your question.
Thank you, Mayor Burton. Actually, a couple of questions, just for my clarity. On the first page, we're talking about different quarters here. We've got Q2 2020 and Q4 2021. Just for my clarity, is that calendar quarter or fiscal?
Through you, Your Worship, it's calendar.
Thank you. And then the next question I have, or comment, sorry, let me just find my comments here. On page 154, so we're saying that the report would take potentially 10 months to complete, at least this portion. So we're thinking 10 months from today?
Through you, Your Worship, the 10 months is an approximate timeline from when the consultant's retained.
Excellent. So we'd have to go for RFP first and then go from there.
That's correct.
And then within that 10-month time frame, would we be keeping developers and new residents in the loop? So I'm asking because I want to make sure that anything that's approved in the next 10 months is either subject or not subject to the new rules.
Through you, Your Worship, as part of the terms of reference before council, there will be stakeholder consultation as part of that process. Depending on the results of the parking surveys, there may also be surveys sent to residents. And when this matter comes back to council with a parking management plan, there will be an opportunity for public consultation also at that stage as well.
So if we were to go through additional amendments or additional approvals within that same time frame, that all of this is pending, would that be subject to the new rules or not subject to the new rules?
Through you, Your Worship, the parking management plan, it's not necessarily under the Planning Act at this stage.
Okay.
So the parking management plan will be developed, and it could recommend changes to, for instance, the zoning bylaw and parking standards, which would be under the Planning Act.
Sorry, I'm asking very unclear questions. I'm going to ask it again. if we were to approve anything over the next 10 months, whatever we decide from a parking management update, would that now apply to anything net new that we're going to be approving going forward? Is that clear?
It's clear, but, and the
Okay.
answer is no, it wouldn't.
Okay.
First, you would have to make if the work recommends changes to the zoning bylaw and so on, that would then have to be done before everything would be.
So no ex post facto, effectively?
That's right.
Okay,
It's,
got it.
it's meant to be a fair world.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Burton, for that. So this is all very helpful, thank you very much. All of this pretty much gels with me from a North Oakville perspective. I think the only concern that I have is one paragraph that's on page 154, just underneath the subsections A through E. And it says the parking management plan will consider how parking can be provided on a full cost recovery basis and how parking can be managed, blah, 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 blah. Yada, 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 I should say, instead of blah, blah, blah. I have some trepidation with this paragraph. In our want or haste to kind of move forward with our North Oakville plan and have it fit into our planning provisions, I fear that this paragraph kind of adds more to the issue instead of detracting from it. And I think that council's directive, at least initially, was to ensure that we have a forward-thinking objective when it comes to parking in North Oakville, not only meeting the Planning Act and the planning standards that we have for North Oakville, but also meeting some of the concerns and the issues that we've seen from a constituency perspective. So I wanted to make sure that that was clear to staff going forward. I understand that this is just a report item right now, but I wanted to make sure that that was very clear from a North Oakville point of view as well.
Thank you very much, Councillor, for the clarity. Councillor Adams, what clarity are you bringing?
I'm not sure if I'm bringing clarity or hoping for clarity, but in any case, I want to ask our staff whether the work would consider the issue of recreational vehicles. I recently had an inquiry by a constituent on the issue of being able to park a recreational vehicle on their driveway. And so I wondered if the reports would consider to what degree does the use of private parking spaces for storage of recreational vehicles, for example, boats or trailers or motorhomes or similar kinds of recreational vehicles, impact the parking needs, and should there be a change to any of our rules, whether they be zoning, bylaws, or otherwise, as a result?
Through you, Your Worship, I can advise that the terms of reference don't currently capture that issue, but they could be amended to capture that issue, certainly through a best practice review of other municipalities and a background research perspective.
Okay, I would like to see whether we can consider that issue.
Councillor, I would suggest that if you were to, whoever will move the motion to authorize the work could add, or you could amend to add that requirement.
Thank you. Then at the appropriate time, I'd like to make that amendment or make the motion with that included.
You've reached that moment.
Then done.
Okay, so I'm going to go to Councillor Hazard-Thiel in a moment, but just to assist discussion, the motion is on the floor that staff prepare RFPs to initiate a residential and Main Street parking study as part of an overall marketing management study as outlined in the report, et cetera, to be, and to include provision for the parking on residential property of recreational vehicles, motorhomes, et cetera. Does that capture what you want? Councillor Hazard-Thiel.
Yes. So I have a couple of questions here. First of all, would the commercial district include Robinson in downtown, because it is a parking area for off Main Street? Would the scope include it?
Through you, Your Worship, yes, it would.
Okay, thank you. My other question is, on page 161 of the report, it talks about it's a guiding principle that, quote, providing high-quality, high-frequency service to corridors where ridership is highest is preferable to providing lower levels of frequency over a greater number of weaker corridors to provide basic geographic coverage. Is that principle ingrained in how they're going, the lens they're going to assess their work on. It's not that I don't agree that higher frequency corridors are a priority. I'm worried that the phrasing of that, if it is considered to be a principle in how they're reporting back, even weaker corridors need to have transit.
Through you, Your Worship, I would agree with that. And the intent for the parking management plan is also for it to be adaptive. It wouldn't be static in time. It would look at transit routes where there's projections for increased transit and ridership over time. So the parking plan could be adapted to that. So it won't just look at the conditions today, but it will look at the conditions in the future, which are planned as well.
Okay. Am I have two more. Am I allowed two more?
They're free tonight.
Okay. So my other is, it talks about future needs. And so is it safe to say that a potential cultural hub addition in downtown Oakville would be factored into an assessment?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, the intent to develop the downtown as a cultural hub would be taken into consideration because that's the livable Oakville context for the downtown. So yes, that would be. The study is looking at more the private development parking requirements, so it has an emphasis on that. It does allow us to confirm some of the institutional requirements for parking, so it would take that element into consideration. But the overall look at downtown assumes the OP designation for it, which it is to be a cultural hub. So I would say yes, it would take it into consideration.
Thank you very much. And my last question is, when I read the context, I don't, in lots that I've been reading from the reports, the emphasis on moving away from the vehicle is highlighted, and obviously from an energy and climate change is important. But I don't see any context around the sociological impact of not of how we structure programs such as recreation. So as a working mom for a gazillion years, yes, I'm that old, our soccer program, as an example, has your kids crisscross the town in the spirit of trying to have us play all together. Our daycares are not necessarily convenient. So parking management and strategies around it should have a sociological statement in here about the real world of what people go through every day to try and get their kids to daycare and to after school and to other programs. I'd encourage it to be added.
Through you, Your Worship, as part of the parking management plan before council, there's the parking surveys that will be undertaken. So there is that realist perspective that will be in the study, which could be supplemented through resident surveys to see why people are choosing to park where they are, why they're choosing to take the car over transit, and so on. So there will be that made in Oakville approach for this plan.
Thanks very much.
All right, anyone else? Can I put the vote? All those in favor? Opposed, if any? It's carried. The Ward 2 Storm Sewer Capital Projects Update. Does this make Ward 2 happy?
No.
Kind of. All right, what do you want to do, Council?
Go ahead. I was going to say, I would move staff recommendation. We've had discussions offline with a couple of properties that we're trying to mitigate problems as a result of bumping out the timelines that were previously anticipated. But thanks staff very much for all their efforts in this regard, and I appreciate it's a very hard position to be put into, but we have timelines in terms of money from the federal government, so I fully appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Chisholm.
And I would echo Councillor Duddick's comments with respect to this, understanding this is a very ongoing, complex issue in our ward with respect to the ditches and flooding and water flows and everything else. The unfortunate part was when we fix one area, it impacts the other homes in front. It's a major issue. And I appreciate why we're doing this because of the funding coming from the government. I understand, and staff have been I congratulate staff on looking at the creative financing to make this happen. And I'm hoping in 2020 we can backfill where it needs to be for the Woodhaven project. But these are outstanding projects that need to get done, and I appreciate all the work the staff has done on this. So thank you very much.
Thank you, councillors. May I put the vote? All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That's adopted. Council, I bring you to item number 10, the Halton Integrated Growth Management Strategy Consultation Strategy. Do you have questions? And does anyone have a motion? Councillor O'Meara.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm just on page 187, where it talks about the objectives of the consultation strategy. We had mentioned this when it came up before about the need to communicate clearly what it is and why we're doing this. And I would like to see if we can also have an objective in there to communicate clearly why and who is bringing and thrusting growth upon us, rather than just say, hey, everybody, we're growing and it's all on us. I'd like to have an element or a component in there as an objective to make sure that while we're doing this, we're communicating why we're doing this, not just what we're doing.
Thank you.
All right. Mr. Planning Director?
Yeah, sorry, can you hear me? Yes, through you, Your Worship. Yes to the councillor, absolutely.
All right. Well, then it's moved by Councillor O'Meara. Councillor Elgar.
Just a question. When we're doing these exercises, I think it's really good we're going out to the public. Based on things that have changed recently, can we then be advising the people how much the impact will be on their taxes for these growth strategies? With new development charge or whatever else is going on when we go forward? To me, we have to be honest with the residents. Growth costs us, the existing taxpayers, money. But that was yesterday. Tomorrow, going forward, it's going to cost a lot more based on what I'm hearing to the existing taxpayers. And I think to be fair and to be open and transparent, we should be telling the information to all the residents also of what the cost is of the growth. And to me, going out with half of it isn't we're not telling the people the right story.
Through Your Worship to the council members. So just to be clear, the task at hand tonight was to indicate a response to our report on August the 6th, and there was a request by council specifically to report on consultation strategy, which is reflected in the staff report tonight. Just to be abundantly clear, the work that we will be doing through that phase gets fed back to the regional process, and then the region would use that element. At that point in time, council, I believe the point you just raised is the part of, if that criteria, which are reflected in the criteria you see on the appendix tonight, then the region will undertake Oakville's input and look at that piece and use the financial piece to come back with a recommendation back to the locals on what do you think how we should go forward. So the part you're raising here is still to be coming forward.
My concern is we're going to go ahead and see what growth do you think will work for Oakville, but there's no dollars attached to let the people make a good informed decision. It bothers me that people say, oh yeah, we can take this many people, but I think the residents would love to know how much more it's going to cost them on their tax base for the growth.
And through your worship, it's my understanding that that information and work is yet to come forward, and you'll have an opportunity at this council and at the regional council level to be involved in that part of it.
So what we're going to send off to the region, though, what will we send off to the region initially?
So if you turn to page 190 of your agenda this evening, you'll see 4 pages there that have the themes, and then there's questions that ask you to help you understand the themes. So the first theme is regional urban systems and local urban structure. We have one on infrastructure and financing. I think this is an important one, obviously. Agriculture, environment, climate change, and lastly, growing the economy, moving people. So we're going to be sending them back. We're going to be doing a number of things. Number one, we're going to run through an exercise online which allows local individuals to say, is this an important criteria in the process, and some may say none of these are important, I don't want to grow. Or some might say you missed my favorite one, and we'll have an opportunity for them to add that and provide an understanding if they think it's really important locally or not. On the examples provided, they're all showing as locally important. Then there's an opportunity to weight that. It's important, but is agriculture important in Oakville, or is that more important in other parts of Halton Region? Potentially might exist in other parts of the Halton Region as a more important local focus. That's the type of input we're going to get back from the community. That input comes back to this council in the form of a staff report. I think we've targeted December the 4th for that information to be before you. And at that point in time, you can have a full public meeting on that, have delegations on it, and decides for yourself what the message you want to send back to the region is.
Okay, I just, I was hoping to have just one question would be, do you support funding growth to any degree, like 1%, 2%, or in your tax base? That'd be a good indicator to see what people think.
Certainly, and through you, your worship, to the member, I believe when we get that back, once we have all the input of the community, which we've been asked to consult on, again, I wanted to say we're having an online presence, we're also doing them per ward, and we'll arrange with the councillors to have that. So once we get that back at that meeting on December 4th, that's the time, I believe, for that information to be packaged up and sent to the region.
Okay. Well, I look forward to going forward, so we tell the people based on what's happening right now, based on all the changes of the provincial government on our development charges. I thank you.
Thank you. May I put the vote? All those in favor? Opposed, if any, and that's carried. Thank you, everybody. Now we turn to the advisory committee minutes. The Heritage Oakville Advisory Committee met August 27th, and we need a motion that the following recommendation pertaining to item 6A of the advisory committee from its meeting August 27th be approved and the remainder of the minutes be received. Volunteer? Councillor Longo. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. We now need a friendly councillor to move that we rise and report. Councillor Elgar, thank you so much. All those in favor? And that's carried. I rise and report the Committee of the Whole has met and has made recommendations on consent item 1, public hearing items 2, 3, and 4, discussion items 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, and advisory committee minutes, item 11, as noted by the clerk. Is there a mover and seconder for my report? Councillor Grant, Councillor Sanju, all in favor? Thank you, that carries. Is there any new business of an emergency, congratulatory, or condolence nature? Councillor Haslett-Thiel.
I'd just like to congratulate Councillor Knoll and Michelle Knoll on an amazing event. I only saw a small portion of it, but what a tremendous effort, and the number of happy smiling faces I saw, you should be congratulated.
Yes, Councillor, and when I said it was a pleasure to be welcome in Knoll Nation, I was spelling nation K-N-A-T-I-O-N. Councillor Chisholm.
Thank you, Worship. Also, congratulations to the Kerr Street Village BIA for putting on Kerrfest the last weekend. Very successful. The crowds were phenomenal, but well organized. We didn't have any issues. And my apologies to Jeff. I didn't get up to see yours. We're really busy giving out hot dogs and all kinds of things. But on the Sunday, we had over 1,500 families, which was almost triple the size from last year. So accolades to the the Kerr Street Village BIA board. They've done a wonderful job.
Yes, they are an outstanding group. Councillor Knoll.
Thank you, Worship. I was actually going to bring up the Fall Fair because I'd like to take this moment to thank. It's a big event that's done by a number of people. So I know that everybody likes to focus on what efforts Michelle and I put into it, but it's a group. It's a pretty big effort on a lot of volunteers' parts, a lot of vendors, a lot of community organizations and such that come together and put this event. This is our 22nd year. And we don't have an exact count, but we figure about 6,000 people visit us throughout the day. It raised a substantial amount of money for the Oak Park Neighborhood Center, which is a charitable organization, and it was a lot of fun. And I really appreciate your worship for being there on the day, and the other councillors, Peter and Beth, and who else? Oh, Janet was there for a little while as well, and of course Jazz came by. And I know everybody else was busy with other things, and the Ward 2 folks absolutely have a pass. And congratulations to our friends at Kerr Street BIA. My team had a lot of fun there on Sunday. I couldn't walk on Sunday, so I wasn't able to be there. So thank you very much to everybody involved. Yep.
All right, well, thank you, everybody. We need a mover and seconder for consideration and reading of the bylaws. Councillor Lischina, Councillor Chisholm. This is the bylaws as listed in the agenda. All those in favor? And that includes 2019-85, a bylaw to authorize a temporary use of land on lands described as Part Lot 28, Concession 3, SDS, Acclaim Health and Community Care Services file. Not to forget to include that. All in favor? Opposed, if any, and that is carried. That completes our agenda. Thank you, everybody, for your contributions, your time and attention, and your very good questions and comments. And it's been great working with you, and we are adjourned.